All right. Good day, everyone. It's CJ, and I'm very excited today to be delivering another interview of Rogue 420. Our guest today is Madison Margolin, and Madison is a prolific writer. She's been writing, blogging about the industry. She is a self-proclaimed specialty covering Jews and drugs, that she's passionate and curious about how people can transcend their minds to access something greater than themselves. And Madison's work has been featured on Rolling Stone, Playboy, High Times. As a matter of fact, how I first got tuned into Madison and her work was a previous interview that I had done with Brian from Toker, and she did a great write-up. I believe it was in the LA Weekly regarding their company launch. So, Madison, welcome to Rogue 420.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I went a little bit over your bio, but I know it's much more robust than that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your education background, how you got into journalism and the cannabis space?
Yeah, sure. So I'm specialized now in cannabis journalism, and I've been doing that for about 3 years. It's kind of funny to hear my bio read out loud to me. I always get shy about that, but the reason I kind of say the Jews and drugs thing is I went to Columbia Journalism School, kind of not knowing what I wanted to do, but I got into that program somewhat randomly, and I was like, all right, I'm going to New York. I'm going to be a writer. Here goes. And I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. But when I was there, I was assigned by my professors to cover Brooklyn's Orthodox Jewish community. And I was going into Hasidic neighborhoods and talking to people and finding out the news and weird stuff over there. And I met a lot of people who were really interested in getting high. And I'd never met super religious people or, religious Jews who were so into that aspect of cannabis culture, which being from California, I'd grown up with. So that was sort of like a side beat in journalism school, writing about Judaism. And then for another class, I wrote a magazine article about New York's medical marijuana program. And so when I graduated Columbia, I got a fellowship at the Forward, which is a Jewish magazine or Jewish online publication, and got a secondary job writing a column about cannabis for the Village Voice. And so I had, again, the Jewish thing and the cannabis thing. And since then, it's sort of just snowballed, and I have been writing mainly more so about cannabis since that point. So almost 3 years now.
Yeah, what's truly amazing, I really enjoy your work. And, when I started researching, the cannabis and then I noticed your name came across in a couple of the articles. I'm like, wait a minute, she's been featured on all these great magazines, these distribution covering the cannabis space. And it's one of my first questions that I usually ask my guest is that, so why cannabis? What inspired you or what motivated you to write about marijuana, about cannabis?
So I always say that writing about cannabis is a way to write about literally everything else in society. The cannabis plant touches medicine, politics, technology, social justice, criminal justice, culture, international politics, all types of things. It's never just about the cannabis itself. And when it is, it's really cool. You get into the science of the terpenes, which are the aromatic chemicals, and the ratios of like one compound to another and how that affects somebody's biological system. And so I think just the way that cannabis touches on so many other fields is really fascinating. And then I should say that I also have grown up around the cannabis conversation, in that my dad is a criminal defense lawyer, and a lot of his cases were marijuana cases. So growing up, I'd hang out in my dad's office or kind of like, help him out, do work for him when I was in high school and college. And I got to meet a lot of people who were getting busted in California's medical marijuana or black market cannabis industries. And these were all pretty decent people. They were dealers and growers and dispensary owners and people who were in the industry who, right now, it's legal, quote unquote legal, but, growing up throughout my childhood, it wasn't. And meeting people who are in cannabis and seeing like the goodness amidst these people and understanding their motivations for providing medicine and all of that was pretty inspiring. And I was like, these aren't criminals. They're getting busted, but they're not real criminals. So I've always been I've always been interested in that aspect of cannabis as well, just from kind of growing up around it.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I'm glad that you mentioned that regarding, the legalization is important, recreational, medicinally, but also what needs to follow that up is decriminalizing it as well. And when you think of our Justice Department, one example that I always give is the amount of medical patients, the medical refugees that literally have to pick up and move from a state because this plant gives so many different medical properties. So what are your thoughts on decriminalizing? Do you think that that's a good next step for the cannabis industry?
So I don't want to advocate specifically for a certain like political direction or track. I mean, as a journalist, I try to stay, I mean, it's hard to be a beat reporter and pretend like you don't have an opinion on the thing that you write about 10 times a week. But in a general sense, I support legalization. And the avenues, so I mean, there's decriminalization and there's legalization. When you decriminalize something, it's not automatically legal. There's not necessarily a robust regulatory scheme that dictates the way in which it's legal. And even now in California, people, who are kind of disappointed with the way legalization is turning out, or say this isn't legalization, this is just regulating a substance that the government is still treating like it's taboo. So I think decriminalization at least comes with a certain level of freedom that the industry could definitely use. But overall, the benefits of something like a legalization program would be that you can regulate pesticides and like edible doses and stuff like that in a way. And so exactly what you're getting as a consumer, and that there's not some sort of like nasty chemical that's being concentrated into your vape pen or that you're smoking on your flowers. So, I mean, anything to begin with, just to deschedule cannabis would be great.
I completely agree. I think that would be a huge move to remove it, from the scheduling table altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, and then also in regards to some of the work, I mean, I follow some of the cannabis research, the different strains in Israel, and they are on the cutting edge as far as cannabis, the research. Do you want to talk a little bit around that, Madison?
Yeah. So Israel's kind of been a pioneer in cannabis research since the 60s. Professor Raphael Meshulam discovered THC, which is the main psychoactive compound in cannabis, I think in 1964, maybe 63. And then since then, he's discovered so much more about the plant, stuff about the endocannabinoid system, which is the body's network of receptor sites for cannabis compounds. But what's great about Israel's medical marijuana program is that it's completely legal. And so growers and doctors and patients can all work together to sort of find solutions for very specific ailments. And they have legitimate studies that they can draw on and continue to execute. And the taboo, without the taboo of having it be a legal drug, at least medically, really like provides a lot of freedom for doctors and scientists and growers to really like breed the best possible cannabis for patients. As far as the rest of the country, people who aren't medical marijuana patients in Israel, they have a quote unquote decriminalization system, but people are still getting busted. There's still sort of like a certain number of strikes before you can just get arrested for cannabis there. So it's not as, it's liberal in one sense in the scientific medical sphere, but the, adult use, general population cannabis policy still has, some work to, they need to do some work on that.
Sure. And I think that research is so important, because that's one of the things, here in the US that we look for is in terms of when it does go to legalize, medicinally, for example, is that our legislatures have a tendency to say, well, we need to do more research. We need to, be able to prove those things. Well, it's kind of hard to do when it's scheduled. As a matter of fact, I think, gosh, when was it? Is there only like one active legal grow in the United States that anyone wanting? Can you share about? And because I forget the story of the university or how it works, and why that cannabis is so flawed because it's old. Go ahead and can you share a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So I believe that one medical marijuana program is in, I want to say Mississippi.
I think that's right. Yes.
Yeah. And Sue Sisley, who's a scientist based out of Arizona, who does a lot of work with cannabis and PTSD, is basically the only one who has legal permission to do cannabis research. But even so, the cannabis that she is getting from the government is stuff that like that I've heard that, that teenagers would stick their nose up. It's really nose up bad. Like it's really bad weed, basically. And it makes it difficult when you have a government that's quote unquote, doing you the favor of providing you weed, and then they provide you really crappy weed. And, when you're working with veterans and when you're working with people whose endocannabinoid systems might be so sensitive to the specific strain or the kind of terpenes or compounds that a certain strain might have, a huge injustice to the program to be working with such a poor quality product. But that said, that's basically the only American outpost for legal research. And beyond that, a lot of it's just anecdotal evidence from states like California or Colorado. But it's sort of a catch-22. So when doctors who may be open to recommending cannabis say, well, we want to see more studies, and then you can't have more studies because it's not legal to do the studies, it's just like, the best thing is to draw on studies from places like Israel.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you go to, write your articles in terms of a journalist, what are your passions? What do you like to write about? I mean, I can gain that from your website, but what are your current passions for this industry? What are your current projects maybe that you're working on?
Yeah. So one thing that I'm really passionate about is kind of the culture of growing cannabis. And basically right now what I'm seeing is, as it's becoming legal, there's a tension between the industry and the movement, in that, for basically 40 years, there have been people growing cannabis in the shadows, in the black market, in the Emerald Triangle, who really risked their freedom to, provide this medicine or, just fun product for people. And those people and the activists who, were parading cannabis before it was a trendy thing to do, took on a lot of that stigma in order to bring the industry to where it is, where now everyone wants in on the green rush, and the industry is really expanding. So I think it's important to honor the people who kind of put themselves out there on the front lines before this was something that everyone was talking about, while also finding a way for this pretty nascent industry to move forward in a sort of conscientious way. And so making sure that there, is social equity in hiring, making sure that minorities aren't left out of the industry, making sure that, again, it's, providing clean product. So I'm really interested in kind of the politics in the industry of growing cannabis and how to preserve that connection to the land and the heritage up in the Emerald Triangle. And then another thing that I'm interested in is cannabis and spirituality. I just went to India, for example, and was interviewing kind of sadhus or holy men there about how what they call ganja fits into their daily spiritual practice. And so...
Oh, that's cool. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So one of the things that when we talk about legalization, we talk about medical marijuana and we talk about adult use or recreational marijuana. And like in between those two things is cannabis for wellness and spirituality, and kind of seeing where, how, there are so many different reasons to use cannabis that all sort of overlap in medical, adult use, recreation, wellness, spirituality. And that's kind of something I want to explore further.
Yeah, let me ask your opinion on something. Is that we're seeing kind of here in the U.S. kind of a national change towards cannabis. I think we had recently former Senate Majority Leader John Boehner come out, and he has launched an advocacy to remove cannabis from the schedule, along with the veterans organizations. We also had the administration that I believe talked to the Colorado senator and assured him that he would protect states' rights as far as medicinal use. Is there any concern? Because it's a concern of mine. I guess I should start preface by saying is that what I'm worried about as far as the cannabis space is that I believe that even down to an individual liberty for an individual to have their own grow for their medicinal benefits or recreational if they choose to do so. Do you have any concern as far as like big corporations coming into this space and really making it more the dynamics about financials and revenue and profits?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing that now, and I'm not saying you have to, smoke weed to be in the cannabis industry. I certainly don't smoke that much. I mean, I smoke, but it's not the bit like, you know, I I guess what I want to see, and I'm already seeing it a little bit, is when you see like the kind of the birth of an industry and you see the forces of capitalism and, you know, American entrepreneurship kind of manifesting in such a new space. Um, as long as there is basically like, how should I say this? As long as there's going to be um, big business cannabis, and there already is big business cannabis.
Right. Correct. Yes.
As long as there's no way to stop it, so I'm not even gonna like try to say that it shouldn't be the case. And a lot of people compare cannabis to like craft beer or the wine industry, and I think again, like prior to legalization, this was an industry built on the backs of small farmers, family people who, were basically just supporting their families growing weed, at least, in some places. And in other places, there are, big warehouse grows, which there still are, more so in Southern California than Northern California. But point being is, as long as the people who are growing cannabis are, making sure the product is safe, that it's organic. More so, organic is like the bottom line. It should be above and beyond organic.
Right.
Making sure that they're hiring minorities and people who come from communities that were devastated by the drug war. Making sure that maybe they're reinvesting their funding back into social justice causes. I know, for instance, MedMen, which is a dispensary chain, helped fund a project with the Drug Policy Alliance where people who had prior convictions could now erase those convictions based on legalization, or not erase or reduce the convictions based on legalization. So putting the money back toward a cause within the space that is going to still move it forward.
Oh, great points. Absolutely.
Yeah, like no way
homelessness
to
and
it's just how to make it better or more conscious.
yeah, and I think Colorado is actually, doing some of those initiatives, those creative programs with the tax revenue. Whether it's helping veterans or it's the homelessness issues that potentially could help a lot of communities. So I'm really glad to hear you say that, and I'm very excited and interested in learning more about your travels to India and how you plan on doing that. I know you're recently getting ready to launch or started a podcast of your own. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm co-hosting the podcast with a pretty cool Rabbi Dan Ain, who's based out of Brooklyn, or kind of heading to San Francisco soon. But yeah, part of that podcast is, so Dan is awesome because he is, a cool rabbi. He's not some guy that, some old guy who's inaccessible and I feel like I can't talk to him. But
right, exactly.
Yeah, he's like a young guy, and I can say like, hey, like how can psychedelics be a spiritual or religious experience, or cannabis or whatnot? And so what we've been doing is interviewing people, artists, scientists, psychiatrists, people who are doing things that kind of just get them out of their own minds for a minute and exploring that process. So I guess two examples. One would be an artist who, Archie Rand, we interviewed, and we just asked him like, at what point does painting feel like a meditation, and like is that a spiritual experience to him? And then another person we interviewed was uh, Dr. Neil Goldsmith, who's a Brooklyn-based psychologist, and has written on psychedelic healing and stuff like that, and also asking him about the intersection between wellness and psychedelics, and like how is that spiritual? And it's not necessarily a religious conversation unless the interviewee wants it to be one. But it's Dan coming at it from the theological standpoint and me coming at it from sort of the journalistic standpoint. And yeah, we're just sort of looking for interesting people to talk to. So.
Oh, that's great. That's very cool. And is there going to be like a website or a podcast site for that?
There will be. Right now, we're still kind of getting. So we're trying to record a total of 10 episodes and get a logo before we release it.
Okay.
But it's called Vices and Visions, and I guess if you Google it within a month, you'll be able to find information on it. And I'll put a link up on my website once we have the proper link.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. Madison, what else would you like our listeners to know about you or to learn? At this time, I just want to open the floor to you to share anything else you'd like to share with our listeners.
Oh, that's hard.
That's okay. We could share if people are interested in learning more about you. If you want to, feel free to promote, your website, your social handles, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, so my website is just my name, madisonmargolin.com. My Instagram is also just my name, Madison Margolin. Facebook's the same. The only one that's different is Twitter, which is reverse. So it's Margolin Madison. And then as far as things that I want to share about myself is I write for tons of publications on so many aspects of the cannabis space. And if you have a cool story, I take pitches. And yeah, in all seriousness, I'm looking to talk to people who are, kind of using cannabis in a ritualistic, spiritual, sacred kind of way. I think that's really an underdeveloped part of the conversation, especially as cannabis becomes a bigger industry. Just seeing that this is not just another. I mean, it is another consumer product, but it's also not. And I want to kind of honor sort of the the spirit of the plant itself and see how that, how we can shed more light on that. And yeah, so that's one area that I want to write more about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. So, Madison, thank you so much for a great interview. I will definitely share the link with you if you want to distribute that to your fans. And for our listeners, again, visit Madison's work at madisonmargolin.com. You can also follow her on Twitter. Great articles that she posts for numerous outlets. Madison, thank you so much for your time, and for Rogue 420 fans. Please make sure to make sure to subscribe, and then also make sure to share this podcast within the community so people can learn more about this very exciting, about cannabis, about the plant, and then also about Madison and her great work. So Madison, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Great. All right. Take care.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.